I'm always keeping an eye out for cool and interesting things in the mechanical keyboard world, much of which is up at the higher end, which is to be expected. But at Computex a couple of months ago, for sure the keyboard that stood out to me the most was this, the Chassepot C1000. And yeah, you can pretty much tell why. But now I actually have it, so let's check it out for ourselves. The packaging was actually quite impressive, looks nice and was coherently well put together, which also includes a dust cover, which I always appreciate. There's some paperwork and a nice welcome card, and finally the USB Type-C cable, which is pretty thick and the end of it is long as. So yeah, look at this thing. Extremely different to anything that I've checked out on the channel, and picking it up, it was surprisingly heavy, coming in at just over a kilogram, which is pretty similar to a standard full-size keyboard, which makes sense because it does have a steel mounting plate and has more keys. I did have this arrow sticker on mine, which I assume is to show a flaw. It looked okay, but above that the plastic is a bit mangled, but that's just for mine. And looking at the side, it just further accentuates that thick look. It does have a typical 6-degree angle of elevation to it, which of course creates a pretty high back and just adds to the uniqueness of the board. There's been other keyboards that have had a more aggressive angle for the secondary part of the keyboard to, I guess, be easier to reach, but I found this absolutely fine. The bottom also looks pretty cool, angular yet clean with just 4 rubber feet in the corners and our on and off switch, so yep, it can be used in wireless mode. And even the sticker arrangement is pretty aesthetically pleasing. And on the back there's a USB Type-C port for wired mode, and that also allows you to use the USB pass-through. Back to the top, the keycaps aren't the greatest. UV coated ABS caps that are laser etched are pretty much as low as you can go. They are 1mm thin, they shine up and will fade over time, but also considering the layout and like these curved corners, which are an interesting choice, this type of keycaps allows them to do it affordably. So it does have full RGB backlighting, which is controlled via the FN key and the arrow keys with a few effects and patterns. And before we get to the layout and usability and all that, let's talk about the handle. I couldn't see anything about the handle on the website, so I don't really know their intentions. It definitely is an eye catcher, which I love. It's something different. It does give a visual break, so it doesn't look as chaotic and crammed, I guess, and also gives that clear visual separation between the two halves. We are only losing a few keys, so I'm not really concerned in that regard. It does make it easier to pick up one-handed, and if for whatever reason you're going to be carrying this around, it does make it easier to do that. So it isn't purely a novelty thing in my opinion. It does serve a few purposes that may not be the most impactful, but it's there. Alright, let's dig into the layout. So the whole thing about this is that it has the lateral size of a 60% keyboard, which allows you to bring your mouse closer, which in turn brings your arms closer together for more natural positioning. So they've done that by basically chucking everything else on top. So roughly we have the function row, so F keys on the left, the nav keys in the center, and the numpad on the right, which is pretty much the order of a normal keyboard. Let's start with the base, so the main 60% area. Everyone is different in how they use their keyboards, and that includes myself of course, so please do keep that in mind as I won't have issues that other people will. We do have dedicated arrow keys, but that's been moved to the left with the right arrow being a different profile, which does help a little bit for locating it. Tough job knowing where to put them. They do mention stuff for gaming, but I never really played many games where you needed the arrow keys. I guess if you want to use them simultaneously with a mouse, it can make sense I guess, but other than that, it's a tough placement to get used to. The up arrow goes in between the left shift and the Z key. I actually didn't have too many issues with that, especially since I'm a caps lock user, but I can see why it can be a big issue. And then that moves the Windows key next to the tab key, that then compresses the bottom row, so we have a 4U spacebar which was perfectly usable, and a backspace on the right of that, which I hardly ever used, but given time it is technically more reachable than the standard backspace. Because of the FN placement, which is up here, the tilde is over here, making for a short right shift. This one actually did mess me up a few times because I do use the right shift mainly for the symbols on the number row. Other small things, there's a 1.25U pipe key, and the caps lock key is gigantic, and most of this is to keep that standard number and letter stagger, which is very important to keep. The FN key is in a pretty good location in my opinion, as it is centralized. The only negative really is that the escape key has to move all the way up to the top left corner. So let's go to that now. The F keys are fine and make sense to me. And here we have Task Manager, File Explorer, and Show Desktop. All pretty useful to have dedicated keys for them, especially the Show Desktop key. The center portion, which is separated, which I like, has all the nav keys and also volume keys and calculator key. The big mute button I did enjoy. It's like the center button of the whole keyboard, so easy to find quickly. And even the screen lock key, which I never really did before, was quite nice to have as well. And then on the right is the numpad. It doesn't have the standard layout of course, so that may be tough to get used to, especially if you do a bunch of number crunching. And that's kind of the whole thing about the keyboard. There's a lot to get used to, and that's the trade-off of approaching a keyboard like this. I think with the top section, it isn't bad and makes sense with the space restrictions that you have. The bottom section is where you really see those shortcomings with the arrow keys, both shift keys, the tilde, and the weird bottom row. So is it worth the compromise? Because the purpose of the keyboard is to have that space efficiency, which is mainly concerned with the lateral space while having primary accessibility to all the keys, rather than having secondary functions and layers that compact 60%, 75%, and even TKL boards have. And it does exactly that. They did emphasize to me that the keyboard is programmable and all that, so we can change around the key mapping and such, but that doesn't particularly fix the issues I have because it's a keycap placement issue. It's a bit too much for me to handle personally, and I'd imagine switching between keyboards may become an issue, but I'm very sure that over time, like many things, it can become very usable. Like even right now, I'm not having terrible issues with it. I used it mainly with just typing and general use and it was fine. But would I rather just have a more standard compact keyboard and relegate all of the extra stuff to a secondary layer? Yeah, I personally would. And that's very personal because I don't require a dedicated numpad and I can live without the function row F keys. However, if those are a requirement, then it does start to make a bit more sense. Fairly critical, but I truly do admire them trying something different, and it is difficult what they tried to do. Okay, so with all that out of the way, back to the rest of the board. This does have Bluetooth capabilities with an 1860 mAh lithium battery. Pairing is simple by holding the FN key and either F1, F2 or F3, which can each store a device. And when it flashes, you just pair it up on the device. Works seamlessly and performance was perfectly fine when typing and with general use. The key switches that I have here are the Artemi Brown, so a lightish tactile switch, meaning that it has a small tactile bump. It is also available in Cherry MX key switches, but I believe those are harder to acquire. There's a little bit of metallic ping, but not too bad. The stabilizers are decent overall, but the spacebar does have a touch of rattle. Overall, it feels fine to type on and is pretty much standard to retail mechs. Unfortunately, despite all my efforts, I couldn't take this thing apart. I mean, I could have tried harder, but I didn't want to destroy it, so my apologies. Alright, so when I first saw this, straight away the word novelty came into my head. And it still does hold that value, but they did really try to come up with a way to have the compact form factor, again in a lateral sense, while having all the keys still accessible. And they did that, and for that I'm really impressed. But its usability is compromised with their execution of the layout, so for me personally I would stick to a typical compact keyboard, as its base functionality is much better compared to the Chassepot. However, you won't find anything else like this. I guess the other approach that would be similar is to have the keys to the left of the keyboard, and that will still give you the mouse space while not having to compromise as much in my opinion. All of this does come at a pretty high price point of $200 USD. High, but I think it's fairish with everything non-standard about it, which does cost more. But yeah, always cool to see something different, and maybe everything is fine for you because everyone is different, so you can make up your own minds.